Think is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit progressive.com, find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. You would think the biggest challenges of putting people in space and bringing them home safely would be scientific, mastering the physics of a rocket powerful enough to blast a spacecraft into orbit while protecting the vulnerable human passengers inside. But maybe the hardest part is the politics. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. Space science doesn't come cheap and will always strike some people as less urgent than whatever terrestrial problems we have. So there is the problem of getting Congress to allocate enough money. There's the geopolitical question of whether to compete with scientists in Russia or China or elsewhere in the world to win space like a zero-sum game or to collaborate. Early on, there were even questions about who belonged in space, given that NASA's earliest astronauts were all white men. Anna Fisher was in the first astronaut class to train women, and when she took her historic flight aboard the Shuttle Discovery in 1984, she became the first mother ever in space. It was groundbreaking, and at the time, it was also downright controversial. Fisher was the chief of the space station branch of the astronaut office, and at the time of her retirement, she was the longest-serving astronaut ever at 36 years and 9 months. Her story is featured in the PBS documentary series Once Upon a Time in Space. Anna, welcome to Think.
I'm glad to be here with you today, Chris.
You grew up at a time when it seems like space was very exciting and it was everywhere. Do you remember when you first became aware as a child that humans were doing this amazing thing and traveling to space?
Oh, I remember the exact moment I got interested and when I decided I was going to be an astronaut. It was in May of 1961 when Alan Shepard, the first American to be launched into space, shortly after Yuri Gagarin, the first human to leave the planet. And when I got to school, our teacher had us gather around and we listened to him as he was talking to Mission Control. And I'm not really sure what it was about it, but it just captured my imagination. And I decided right then and there that I wanted to be an astronaut someday.
I grew up with teachers kind of wheeling in the TV set so the class could watch a shuttle launch. For you, the teacher brought a transistor radio.
Transistor radio was a PE class. And so we were outdoors. And so she had us gather around her. And so we were just listening to him talk. But I had seen, of course, some pictures of the Mercury astronauts, so I was aware they existed. But, back then I wasn't, I was a young child. I wasn't really listening to the news all the time and things like that. My parents kind of controlled the TV set, but I was aware that, that the Mercury astronauts were there. And I, I'm so grateful that that teacher had us gather around and listen, because then as I listened to him talking to Mission Control, I just decided, I love math, I love science, and I thought, wow, what a neat thing to combine the things I love with exploration. And I never lost sight of that feeling. It's interesting to be able to pinpoint the exact moment when you made a decision, which of course seemed like a very unrealistic decision at that point.
But you didn't feel like you could tell anybody, right?
Oh, I never told anybody. I was afraid people would laugh at me. Certain. Then as I got older, and I became, more aware of the world, and at the time the limitations on women being able to do certain things, it just didn't seem like a very realistic goal. I was very shy, and I didn't want people to laugh at me, so I never really expressed it to anyone except my best friend, my best girlfriend. We were talking one day, and I told her, and of course I trusted her. I don't know what she actually thought. She never said, she didn't say anything one way or the other.
When you were really young, like around the time of that Alan Shepard launch, did you draw pictures of space, of yourself in space or people in space?
No, I'm not a great artist. That would never have occurred to me. That gene was not in, I did not inherit that gene.
So you mentioned being very shy as a girl, and I've had the privilege of interviewing a lot of astronauts over the years, men and women, and shy is never a way that I would describe them. It's not a way I would describe you if you hadn't told me based on this conversation. Was there something about the job that required you to get comfortable talking to anybody?
Well, if I had realized that speaking in public was a requirement to be an astronaut, I would have really had to think that over
Huh.
because that would have worried me way more than launching on the shuttle. I was not afraid to take a risk of that kind, but getting up and talking in front of people, that was always the thing. Like in school, in high school, when I had to do a presentation, I was so much more afraid of that than taking a math exam, a history exam, or any of that. Any hard class that I could do something on paper with, I was fine. Getting up in front of a group of people, just I was really frightened by that.
So, school was something that came easily to you. What sort of career, even as you had these dreams of going to space, what sort of career actually was made to seem possible to you as a girl growing up in the 50s and 60s?
I did a lot of thinking because, at the time, women were pretty much limited to uh, being a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. I mean, that there were women who did things outside those fields, but those were the three predominant fields that women were encouraged to pursue. But I didn't want to do any of those. I wanted to do I wanted to do something different than that. It wasn't. I'm not sure why. That's just. There was a series of books I read when I was in middle school, and it was about different women like Madame Curie, Elizabeth Blackwell, Susan B. Anthony, and I. I remember those books really influencing me, saying, I want to do something really meaningful and that has an impact. I didn't care. It wasn't like I wanted to try to be famous or something like that. I just wanted to do something impactful. And I was trying to figure out what that was. And at the same time, I was reading those books. That was probably about a year or two after I had listened to Al Shepard. And the idea of being an astronaut just kept sticking in my mind. And being part of the first steps of leaving our planet was something that I really thought would be really something that I wanted to do. Because that, to me, every person is different, but what would give meaning to my life would be able to contribute to those very first steps of leaving our planet so that we could eventually go to other planets and hopefully eventually to other solar systems. So that was kind of what I was trying to figure out what I could do.
It gives me goosebumps to think that young girls, young women might be reading your story now and thinking, I want to be like Anna Fisher.
Of course, I didn't do this for that reason. I was doing it for, finding my own way in life and trying to find something that brought me personal satisfaction. But if my story can uh, be meaningful to other young women and young girls to think, maybe I can do that. That's one of the fun things about having been in the first group of women was perhaps being able to get that message to young girls and to young boys. To be honest, I recently had a young, well, he's now a Air Force pilot and had his PhD, saying that he was motivated to do the things he did when he first heard about me when he was 9 years old.
Huh.
And so getting that kind of feedback from both young girls and young boys that maybe your story gave them the courage to pursue their dreams is a really nice feeling to have.
What do you remember about meeting Alan Shepard for the first time?
We met a lot of the early astronauts when we first came to NASA. They brought in Alan Shepard, Neil Armstrong, all all the different astronauts came to just talk to us. And John Glenn, it was, and to me, it was like meeting, superstars or a
Mm.
rock star or something like that. It was just, it I was just in awe of them, But it was so neat to finally get to meet them and to, I wouldn't call myself a colleague of them, but to at least be following in their footsteps. A really funny story. Years and years later, it was like in 2014. I was at a reception. We were watching the first launch of the Orion spacecraft, and there was a reception. And who should I wind up talking with but one of Alan Shepard's daughters. And we were talking, and she said, "Well, what made you want to be an astronaut?" I just thought that was so funny. I said, "Well, funny that you, of all people, should ask that question."
When you got to NASA, did you feel like everybody who was already there was supportive of your class, the first class that included women?
I think we probably had a little bit of a mixed feeling about not so much the women, just our whole class, because I don't remember exactly what the size of the office was when we arrived. But I mean, maybe there were 20 people, maybe not even that many. I'm not quite sure what the exact number were, but all of a sudden they bring in 35 new people.
Mm.
So, and many of them, some of them had not yet even flown in space. Some had flown one mission either in Gemini or Apollo or Skylab. But some of them had not yet flown in space. So I'm sure they welcomed having other people to do the work, but I'm sure they also were worried, like, would we impact their ability to fly in space? Because at the beginning of a program, it takes a while to, get up to speed and get everyone, get the program up to speed so that you can have enough flights for everybody.
Yeah, it is such an interesting relationship to set up. You have these colleagues, but you also have people who ultimately are sort of competing for a very limited number of spots on these flights.
It's always the same kind of thing. They come in and everybody's all excited about being an astronaut, and everybody bonds, and you have happy hours and go over to people's houses and you're training and all that stuff. Then comes the first crew assignments of people in your group. And it's a very delicate balance between feeling happy for your friends and your colleagues, but disappointed for yourself if that was a particular flight you wanted to be on. But one thing that really helped me, and hopefully I use that experience to help others after me, was I wound up taking a 7 year leave of absence from 1989 to 1996, and for many reasons. But the bottom line was, I think before I went on my leave of absence, you get so immersed in the culture and wanting to, fly at first and fly often, and you get more caught up in the competitiveness. Once I was away for 7 years, I stepped back and I realized, wow, you are just so lucky to be an astronaut.
Mm.
It doesn't matter if you fly first, in the middle, or last. And I remember talking after I came back, and particularly when I was chief of the space station branch, I remember talking to the new class that just came in right around that time. It was the 1996 class, which was actually the largest class. We were 35 and they were 36. And I remember telling them as they finished their introductory training and then came to work in the branch, the space station branch, telling them, try not to lose the good feeling you have now, because no matter if you fly first in your group or last in your group, you're just very, very lucky to be here. I think maybe a few of them actually listened to me.
Anna, you talked about, the sense of competition. I mean, it was quite literally close to home for you. Your husband at the time was also an aspiring astronaut. You were the first of the couple of you to be selected by NASA and then the first to fly.
Yes, but I was selected in the 78 class and he was not, he applied, but he was not selected on that one. So he was selected in the 1980 class. So I had seniority.
Was there part of you that felt like you had to sort of put a bushel over your light a little bit at home, or were you able to sort of fully experience the joy of being picked first?
Oh, well, it was sort of bittersweet because I knew how much Bill wanted it too. But I think we had a pretty realistic assessment. First of all, we didn't even have any idea whether even one of us would get selected. But of the two of us, because of my background in chemistry before I went to medical school, we both thought that if either of us had a chance, that I probably had the better chance. And so I can honestly say that Bill was very supportive. He never made me feel bad about being selected and that he wasn't. It just made him more determined to try harder the second time. So when he was going to apply again. But for me, of course, as his wife and caring about him, there was nothing he ever said. It's just like when I went on my first T-38 flight, for example, and I came home, I probably was not as wildly excited as I might have been had he already, say, been an astronaut too, and said, "Well, how did your flight go?" But it was nothing that he did. It was just me not wanting to make him feel bad. But and I think he also realized as he watched our class, he got a much better idea of the things he needed to do to improve his resume.
How does a well respected ER doc with a background in chemistry prepare for an interview as an astronaut candidate at NASA? How do you possibly get ready for an interview like this that not very many people even get to do?
You know, I really did not get a chance to prepare at all because it happened so quickly. I watched the younger or the more recent astronauts come in, and with all the information available online, and also for the military astronauts, they have their own little grapevine of knowledge. So they come in really knowing exactly what to expect. And you can read all the astronauts' experiences. But for us, it was a totally new experience. There wasn't access to the information, and I think even NASA was still figuring out the process. They knew what to do. They had a really good process for selecting the military test pilots. I don't know that they knew exactly. They were kind of feeling their way as well. And there certainly was no easy way to find out what the process was like. And I was just finishing my internship. So, for anyone who has family members that have done medical training, that is so all consuming. I barely had time to get my application together because back then, and actually it was Bill, he was a year ahead of me. So he had a little bit more time. He wrote away, we got our applications. They had to be physical applications. You had to fill them out. Your resumes, your transcripts, everything had to be done by mail or by phone or in person. So I got my application in the day before the deadline. 6 weeks later, I was in Houston. And so for my interview, so I honestly had absolutely no idea what the interview process was like. Everything, um, the only, the day that we arrive on a Sunday, and then it's a week long interview process. So Sunday night, they had us all get together and they gave us a little more information about what the week was going to be like. And then we found out there were going to be medical exams and interviews with psychiatrists and everything. But there was no word out on the street, if you will, about what the selection process was like and that you would have an interview with the, selection board and who was on the selection board. But in a way, now looking back on it, I'm kind of grateful because as a result of not really knowing what to expect, I wasn't that nervous. Whereas if I had realized how important the interview with the selection board was, I would have been so nervous. And I think a lot of the and again, because I am so shy, or I was at that point. Um, Somebody saw me and said, "You're an introvert that has learned to act like an extrovert." And I thought that was very insightful of that person. And I said, "Well, how did you know that?" And he said, "Because I'm one." But if I had realized, how important each of those things were, I would have been so nervous. It would have, you know, I don't think I would have been as relaxed. But as a result of it, I just sort of came into everything cold and without any preconception of what was expected. So I just said, well, I guess the only thing I can do is be myself and hope that's good enough.
As I understand it, Anna, during that week-long interview process, at least somebody asked you if you intended to have children in the next few years, and you told them yes. And I'm so curious, it feels like an illegal question. And I'm so curious if there was any part of you uh, that occurred to even just say that is none of your business.
Well, actually, they never did ask me that
Oh,
question.
they
No one
didn't ask
asked
you
that
that.
question.
Okay. Okay.
What happened was the interview went on for about an hour and we were just finishing up. And I said, and oh, by the way, you should probably know that I do want to have a family someday.
Okay.
And I'm going, I gave advice to both my daughters and I said, please don't be as dumb as I was. I said, it's illegal to ask that question. And so you're right. No, nobody, I just offered that up.
And then you were like 8.5 months pregnant when you actually received the assignment for a year and a half later to fly. Is that right?
That is correct. And I was never more surprised in my life. In fact, um, what was really interesting, my boss called Bill and I both in when he wanted to tell me, like normally when you get a crew assignment, they call the whole crew in, and then you walk over and your boss tells you that. But he called Bill and I in, because I'm sure because I was 8.5 months pregnant, saying that he wanted to assign me to the flight. And what did we think? And I looked over at Bill and said, you be quiet. This is my decision. So, but no, Bill was very supportive, and there was no way. This has been my dream since I was 12 years old. I'll have to admit, I was really pretty shocked actually that he had the confidence to assign me to a flight when I hadn't even had the baby yet. Because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, most pregnancies go well and everything, but you never do know. So I thought it was. I felt extremely surprised, but also a little gratified that he thought I could do that.
I looked this up, and before you were the first mother in space, Alan Shepard and Buzz Aldrin and Gus Grissom and Neil Armstrong were among more than a dozen fathers that NASA had sent into orbit. I also tried to look up all the controversy over whether it was uh, selfish or improper or strange for a father to make the decision to fly in space, and I couldn't really find much.
They were no, they were never asked that question. I was the first person to deal with all those questions, but I found it so funny. I don't know, if you followed the Artemis 2 mission, but I saw one interview with Reed Wiseman, the commander of the mission, and somebody asked him, because his wife had passed away earlier from cancer, and somebody asked him the question, do you feel it was right for you to go into space and take that risk when your daughters had already lost their mother? And the situation, of course, was slightly different, but he was the first of my male colleagues that I ever heard ask the question.
Did you know it was coming, like before it even happened?
I was not surprised that somebody would ask me that question. No, and quite honestly, I didn't mind. I did point out on several occasions, you haven't asked the males those questions. But then again, you know, males had, gone into war and flew fighter planes. Most of my colleagues in my class had flown, you know, numerous combat missions in Vietnam and stuff. So it just was a different era then. When they just announced the Artemis 3 crew, and it's an all male crew, and they got so many questions. I even noticed it was an all male crew, because you hardly ever see a crew now that doesn't have at least one female on board. And poor Jared Isaacman, the new NASA administrator, had to answer questions about it. And I was just laughing because I look back and think, we were getting all these questions about, women. Everyone was always surprised when there was a woman on a crew and would they be able to do the job. And now the Artemis 3 crew got questioned because there was no female on board. So I think we've come a long way.
So in a way that feels like progress to you.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it is really dangerous to go to space. You were at NASA. You were, of course, not, your flight was already completed when the Challenger disaster happened. And these were, not just colleagues, but people you knew really well and intimately and cared about. How do you make peace before your first space flight with the possibility that you might not come back?
Well, first of all, even though Challenger hadn't happened, we all understood the risk. We all knew that the shuttle really did not have any, ejection capability or anything like that. So we understood the risk. The way I dealt with that was, first of all, I was incredibly lucky and fortunate to be in that first group of women. My first child was a girl, and I wanted her to know that her future was whatever she wanted it to be. And I was hopeful that if anything happened to me, that she would be proud that at least I was setting an example that yes, women can do these things also, and you can have a family. But that being said, I was aware of it, but I didn't I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it because once I made a decision to be an astronaut and was fortunate enough to be in that first group of women, I didn't expect it to happen that I was going to be a new mom and going into space at the same time. But at the same time, as I thought about it, I said, well, this gives me the opportunity to show that women can have a family and they can do things that are risky. And then once I made that decision, what I the way I don't second guess myself, but I just at that point made the decision, basically to compartmentalize and just not think about it anymore, other than we did, and that's kind of what led to Once Upon a Time in Space, using a lot of the videos. We decided to take lots of videos, and not just like of birthdays or special occasions, but just, videos of just ordinary things, eating breakfast, eating dinner. And Bill would do that. He sometimes I'd be taking a nap with Kristen, and I would find out that he had taken a video of us while we were taking a nap together. So he did all those things, so that if anything did happen to me, Kristen would at least have these videos and know how much I loved her. And so, and actually, it's been really interesting because as an adult, she actually watched. It was about 25 hours of videos. And, as a child, you don't, most people don't remember their first, certainly their first 3 years. And she said it was really interesting to go back and watch those videos and see what I was like as a new mom, because most of us don't even remember that.
I do want to ask you, I imagine on career day, like somebody's mom is a dentist and somebody's dad works, owns a dry cleaning place. Were you like the queen of every career day at your daughter's schools that you were ever invited to?
We did have a lot of fun because we got to go, take the kids on field trips to Space Center Houston and things like that. So that part was really fun. But yeah, kids are really what's the word I'm looking for? Adaptable or amazing. They just take everything in stride. I don't think my daughters and by extension their friends, because they grew up with us, we were just Kristen's mom and dad. They were aware we were astronauts and they thought that was cool. But it was really funny because, and then particularly in the Clear Lake area where the Johnson Space Center is physically located, south of Houston proper, uh, so many people in the area are involved in the space program. Their parents are astronauts, flight directors, flight controllers, engineers. So, there's so many kids that their parents are involved in space that they really take it for granted. And I don't think my daughters really thought much about it till they went away to college. That was really the first time when they would talk with their friends and their friends would say, "What's your parents do?" And her friends were like, "Your parents are astronauts?" And I think that was the first time that it really, really hit them that they had a very unusual upbringing.
I will never go to space, Anna, but I am fascinated by the emotional experience of waiting for launch. Like, I find the scariest part of a roller coaster to be that slow tick straight up just before you start screaming straight down at crazy speeds. Was there a most and least intimidating part of launch for you?
Well, definitely the morning of launch, as you get ready, well, the whole experience is just so surreal, especially, I've been dreaming about this since I was 12 years old, and now the day is actually here. And it just has this very surreal feeling. And you've watched all these other your crewmates and your colleagues walk out and do that, and now it's your turn. So it's a really surreal feeling. But then when you're in the Astrovan, the pilot Dave Walker, who's a good friend of both Bill's and mine, we stood at the front of the Astrovan behind the driver, the whole drive over from crew quarters to the launch pad, and you could see the xenon light shining on the shuttle. This is like around 3 or 4 in the morning, and and it's just, and you're getting closer and closer, and then you get there and there's nobody on the pad. Normally there's hundreds of workers all over working on the shuttle getting it ready, and then you get out there and there's nobody there except the people that are with you, that are going to help you get strapped in. And so that makes it even scarier when there's not all the people out there. And then you get up on the elevator and ride up to the 195-foot level. And I was the fourth person to strap in. So inside the white room where they help you get it into your harness and all that, there's not a whole lot of room. So I stood outside, just outside the hatch on the access arm, and we launched on November 8th. So it was a full moon. There was a beautiful full moon reflecting on the ocean, and right next to you is the shuttle and the external tank, and it's just like, there's just like this unreal, it just seems so unreal, and yet it is real. And so then finally, when everyone gets strapped in, and then they close the hatch, and then the closeout crew leaves, and then basically you're the only for us it was a 5-person crew, the only 5 people there. And it starts to get really real after that. And so I did a lot of things, where there's a little bit of lighthearted joking, but for the most part we're pretty well focused on our mission. And then, when it got really real was the way the shuttle countdown worked. There was a 10-minute hole at T minus 9 minutes. That was the last chance for all the flight controllers to check all their systems and make sure everyone was go. And just as that hold is coming to an end, they go around the room and each person says, booster, go, so and so, go, go, go. And when you hear all those goes, even when I say that to you, I get goosebumps.
Raptor 1. Go. Raptor 2. Go. Stage 1. Go. Stage 2. Go. Copy, go for flight. Clock is rolling.
Because I'll never forget, okay, no, this is getting really real. Looks like we're going to go. And so then as they come out of that hold and you start going into the last few minutes of the countdown.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.
And there's only been, I think, maybe 2 shuttle flights, one before I flew. So it had happened once before where you get down to where the engines start and then they shut down because the computers sense a problem. And so it had happened on one flight before my flight. So I knew that could happen, but it was a very unlikely thing. And so, and then as you get to 1 minute, and then at 30 seconds, the onboard systems take over completely. And, once you see that clock counting down from 30 seconds, before that, I remember I thought about Bill, I thought about Kristen, my mom. And then at around 30 seconds, I said, okay, it's time now to get all that out of your mind and focus on the mission. I was the flight engineer. So, I did all the ascent entry training with the commander and pilot, and there's a lot of things you're, supposed to be ready to help them with in terms of procedures and all. So I remember, so then finally when it was, when the 3 main engines start at T minus 6.6 seconds, and then the solids ignite at T0. And boy, when those solids ignite, you may not know where you're going, but you definitely know you're going somewhere. And I remember Dave, and you have to realize, we're laying on our back. So he's not to me, he's up. And I remember he reached his hand back to give me a high five because whatever happened, we were because we were again the 2 rookies on board. So yeah, we were on our way, and that was it. And then the rest of the whole ascent, I was mostly thinking, just airspeed, altitude, main engines. Just keep those engines burning. And the happiest moment was at 8.5 minutes when the main engine shut down and we were on orbit. And I can honestly say that after that, I don't think I was ever worried about physical safety. You're worried about whether you're going to do your part of the mission correctly and all that sort of stuff. But the only fear for physical safety to me was those 8.5 minutes. I think we had gotten a little bit complacent about entry by this point. And it wasn't really until the Columbia accident, many, many years later, that I think we really started realizing, entry is also something we just cannot be complacent really about anything.
Definitely can't be complacent. In a way, I'm glad that you were able to, approach reentry without that level of fear that is probably appropriate. I am curious also about after, because, some astronauts go on to fly multiple missions. You flew this one. You can't know at the time when you return to Earth that this is the last time you will be in space, but it's something you've dreamed of your entire life. And then it's happened. It's come and gone. You had a long and very important career with NASA after this. But is there a grieving process after the flight?
Oh, well, I remember my first words to Bill when I saw him. My first words to him were, "It was all worth it." And so, and at the time, I was assigned to my second flight about a month after we landed. And I was about 6 weeks from my second flight when the Challenger accident happened. And so my career had a sort of a different pathway because, every time there's an accident like that, you get delayed a couple of years. And like I said, I wound up taking a leave of absence for many reasons and things. And then I came back was going to get assigned to my flight again, and the Columbia accident happened. So, there's a little bit of luck and timing in everything. But I wouldn't trade that one flight for anything in the world, because it was just so it was so fun to be doing something that nobody had ever done before. And we had to figure out really how to do the things. So, yes, there's a little bit like I would love to go as a space tourist right now, but I am totally happy with the experience I got to have. And I would love to have gone on more flights. I would have loved to have gone up to the space station after working so hard. I was the chief of the space station at the very beginning when we launched the very first elements. And then we had to figure out the assembly sequence and how we were going to operate this. And so that was, a good 4-year period. And that was so much it was really fun. I mean, it was challenging, but so much fun.
I'm curious about, you helped build this program that brought the International Space Station into existence. What kind of culture existed within that program to ensure that astronauts felt welcome and supported no matter where they came from, what their country of origin was? How deliberate was the process of really making this an international effort?
I'll have to be honest and say that when I first came back after my leave of absence, and I found out that we were going to build a space station and do it as a partnership, particularly with the Russians. And again, I would remind your audience, most of the people in my era grew up in the Cold War era. And so, we were used to being fearful of a nuclear war with the Russians and things. And then I found out we were going to partner with the Russians. I was kind of not sure that we had not lost our minds. But boy, did I change my opinion. Because then, let me just say that when I first came back from my leave of absence, pretty much all the people that had been there at the beginning of the shuttle program had left. They had either gone on to other positions in NASA or in the aerospace industry or back to their universities as professors. So there were very few people, there were nobody except me in the office, and I think maybe Shannon Lucid, that remembered what it was like at the beginning of the shuttle program. And the beginning of a program is very different than a program that's mature, which by the mid 1990s, the shuttle program was very mature. Good procedures, good training, and all of that. So now we were starting at the beginning again, and we were going to build this very complex vehicle. And not only were we going to do that, we were going to do it with our international partners. And so it took a while to figure that all out. And to get the training working. I know a lot of the astronauts, they would say, well, why do we have to go to Russia for 3 weeks to learn how to turn on a light switch in the station or something? Because the Russian training program was very different than our training program. And so getting all of this to work together was a real challenge. But it turned out we all adapted. I got to meet the different people who were in charge of the training in Russia. The flight directors met their counterparts in Russia. The flight controllers in each system got to know their counterparts in Russia, and then eventually all of our other international partners. And it's just been an amazing thing to see. And after I retired, I made a trip to Russia for the State Department. And I asked if I, could go back to mission control. And all the people that I had worked with like 10 years earlier, a whole group of them came to come see me again. And I still have friends there that I communicate with even now. And I think it's amazing how, despite the political situation between the United States and Russia over the war in Ukraine, the space station is operating without problems. Mission Control Houston is working with Mission Control Moscow on every SpaceX launch that carries 4 astronauts up to the space station. One of those is always a cosmonaut. One of the four is always a cosmonaut. And on every Soyuz launch out of Baikonur, there's one U.S. astronaut. And so I just think, and when they're up on orbit on space station, I've heard of no problems. They all get along. I don't know if they discuss politics or if they choose not to discuss it, but they all get along. They all become friends. And I think the space station is a model to the world of how we can all learn to get along. We can be different. We can believe different things, but we can find some common ground about the things we do believe in together. And the thing I love about space is I think it unites people, and at least that's been my experience so far. So we'll see what happens now with China.
Anna Fisher was chief of the space station branch of the astronaut office at NASA, a former astronaut herself, first mother in space, and at the time of her retirement, she was the longest-serving astronaut ever at 36 years and 9 months. Her story is featured in the PBS documentary series Once Upon a Time in Space. Anna, it has been a real delight to talk with you. Thank you for making time.
Thank you so much, Chris. I've enjoyed it too. You ask really great questions.
Thank you. Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you get podcasts, and at think.kera.org. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.